Finally, Swaggle has decided to talk about wrestling comics. I don't know about you guys, but when the bell tolled for The Undertaker, I marked out. I legit marked out. I am a 41-year-old man. And when Mark Calloway showed up behind The Rock, I was screaming like a preteen girl at a Taylor Swift concert. That's how I felt. Wrestling is back, baby. WrestleMania 40 was lit. And so in this video, we had to do it. We finally had to do it. We had to talk about wrestling comic books. Because wrestling and comics go hand in hand. They're like peanut butter and jelly. For the longest time, there has been a cross-section of wrestling fans and comic book fans because wrestling is basically live action superheroes. So in this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about wrestling comics, how they've been slowly gaining steam in the market, especially in the wake of the sort of finish the story storyline. And I wanted to share with you guys some of the interesting wrestling comic books that you may want to keep your eye on if you're hunting them in the wild. But of course, before I get into the video, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate it. Helps support the channel doing those things. Also, Sanity Kickstarter, 8 days left. But let's get into this video here today. Now, there you see it, guys. WrestleMania 40 shatters multiple WWE records to become the highest grossing event in company history. This past weekend, we had WrestleMania 40, and it was pretty epic. You had a lot of people going back into wrestling. You know, the nostalgia was there, you know, and especially a lot of comic book collectors. I noticed, you know, kind of tuning into the wrestling event, you know, talking about wrestling. And so I thought it would be sort of appropriate for us to talk about, you know, some comic books that relate to the event. Now, a little bit of a caveat here. There are tons of wrestling comic books. There are so many retail variants that exist. There are so many homages and parody covers and things of that nature. In this video, I really wanted to stick to kind of the main ones, you know, the ones that are officially licensed or the ones that, generally speaking, I understand them to be, you know, canon to, say, the comic book world. But of course, like I already mentioned, wrestling has a rich history in comic book lore, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with the, you know, story of Spider-Man. You know, when he initially got his powers, he was, you know, in fact, put up against a wrestler. But even before we had Spider-Man doing wrestling, you can go all the way back to 1943, you know, of the golden age. And you can pick up obscure titles like Smash Comics number 41, where it introduces a sensational new laugh character, Daffy the Woman Wrestler. You know, all the way back in the 40s, they had lots of comic books that actually adapted wrestling. It's had a long history, especially in American pop culture. Later on, Ross Andrew, you know, who you guys may know as a very prolific artist within Marvel and DC, you know, created this character in 1951. Mr. Universe, number one, not a character that has, you know, persisted throughout, you know, pop culture, but one that was still kind of important to the mythos of wrestling and its involvement in comic books. You know, you even have Superman, you know, get involved in wrestling here. Superman 155 from 1962, him going against the Italian wrestler Antonino Rocca, who, if you guys know, was a famous wrestler, you know, based out of Italy back in the day. Of course, I'm just pointing out a few that took place during the Golden and Silver Age before we actually sort of move on to, say, the WWF related comic books. Then later on, Spider-Man would take on another wrestling figure, Amazing Spider-Man 139 here, where he would actually go up against the Grizzly. This comic book actually, incidentally, is also drawn by Ross Andrew, who created Mr. Universe here. So kind of funny that you can tell that this comic artist, even back in the day, was a wrestling fan. And hey, you never know, guys. Maybe Grizzly is going to be popping up in future Spider-Man storylines. But maybe the first most interesting cross-section of comic books and wrestling actually starts with Marvel Comics Presents Wolverine number 45. And what is the significance of this? Well, this is actually an ensemble series that features a bunch of short stories in it. And one of the short stories is actually The Incredible Hulk versus a depiction of Hulk Hogan. This is actually a story that was written by Peter David. And at the time, I do believe that there was friction between Marvel Comics and Hulk Hogan and WWF, because they sort of felt like he was ripping off the Hulk title. So Peter David wrote this story where Hulk actually goes against Hulk Hogan in the ring, and obviously Incredible Hulk sort of mops the floor with him. And right here he finishes out saying, "Any other of you clowns want to swipe a name you don't deserve just to get ahead." So there you go. This is kind of, in a lot of ways, the first crossover between WWF and Marvel comic books, a book that came out in 1990. Not necessarily a book that is particularly expensive, not necessarily one that is considered a major key by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, this is definitely a book you can sort of find in dollar bins all the time, but maybe a fun comic book to own, being that it has that, I guess you would call it, that first appearance of Hulk Hogan, in comic book form. But it wouldn't take long for the WWF to find themselves in comic book magazines and comic books when in 1991 they officially joined forces with Valiant comic books, and they produced what is, in my opinion, the sort of first official WWF comic book. It's Battlemania #1. Here you see it. This is Ultimate Warrior on the cover, and this is actually in magazine format. So there may be a lot of you guys out there that don't like the magazine formats. I mean, it incorporates a lot of sales catalogs and posters on the inside and things of that nature, but definitely something that can be considered a collector item. There were other issues in this run that you guys can see. Battlemania #2 had the Bushwhackers here. #3 had the Mountie versus the Big Boss Man. #4 here has the Undertaker on it. #5, you have the natural disasters versus the Legion of Doom right there. And Valiant would also then go on to make Valiant comic books, which, as far as like which ones came first, it's a little bit hard to tell. I do believe that Battlemania #1 was the first one, and then these comic books were all released in October of 91. At least that's what CGC says. And then the Battlemania series would continue on. But, these ones right here are probably your best bets as far as like, what is the first comic book that you may want to own. Of course, you have World Wrestling Federation's Ultimate Warriors Workout. You gotta love the old school WWF logo. I mean, it is the best logo. I mean, that's the one thing. I mean, wrestling maybe is on the come up. It's coming back. It's coming cool. But this classic color palette right here, oh man, that right there gives me member berries like nothing else. You got this one right here, World Wrestling Federation Lifestyles of Brutal and Infamous. This right here would be your first Undertaker cover. I do believe that The Undertaker is inside the Battlemania magazine, so that might be his first appearance in the comic book, but this would definitely be the first time he is on the cover. You got this one right here, again, another one which maybe this is the first time he's on the cover. Again, these books, sort of hard to know which one came out first. I mean, let me know in the comments if you actually do know the order in which these books were released. But another one that, is a Valiant book that features Warrior and Undertaker on it. And generally speaking, these are sort of the first go-to traditional WWF comic books, in my opinion. Now, while Valiant had the WWF title in 1991, Marvel ended up working and partnering with WCW right here. As you guys can see, that this is the official Marvel Comics licensed comic for WCW. Now, the problem with these comic books, I mean, maybe there's people out there who really, really like them. They all have photo covers on them. I personally don't like photo covers, and I point out just the #1 issue because it's probably the one that is the most quote-unquote expensive. Now, most of the comic books I've shared with you guys aren't that expensive. I mean, the Battlemania stuff and the Valiant comic books, it is kind of hard to find them in high grade, but there's really not that much demand there. And admittedly, while the art is fun, it's not necessarily all that great. So, these aren't necessarily books that, collectors would love to have on their shelf. And that's really one of the problems that, is always going to sort of hold them back. But I'm just pointing these out to you guys just so you guys can have a familiarity with some of the options and the titles that are out there. Now, the next book or series I wanted to talk about was this one right here, which maybe has a lot of infamy around it. This one is Warrior #1 from 1996. Of course, this was the Ultimate Warrior's own comic book and his own, I guess, publishing company. This was at that time when he was having friction with WWF. He left them, and then he thought that he would become, a warrior superhero and make money in comic books. Boy, was he wrong. 1996, probably not the best time to get into, comic books and the comic book market. But this title, I believe, went for 4 issues and has a little bit bit of kind of a meme infamy within comic book collecting. I do think that this is one of those comics that was very heavily printed and probably didn't sell that well. So there's probably a lot of this book, sitting in warehouses or had been sitting in warehouses for a long time. So it's not particularly hard to find, but if you're an Ultimate Warrior fan, I definitely think that this is the comic book for you. We flash forward to 1999, where Chaos Comics actually released a series of WWF related things. Chaos Comics was run by Brian Pulido. This was kind of like an independent publisher that later I think got bought out by Dynamite Entertainment. But within their run, they did a bunch of different series. One for Stone Cold Steve Austin, one for The Rock, one for Mankind, and another one for The Undertaker right here. Now, if you're an Attitude Era fan, I point these out to you because as far as I understand it, these would likely be the first appearances of Stone Cold in comic book form. Of course, there are some variant covers that you may want to pay attention to. You do have the photo one right here, which again, I'm not really a fan of. You have this premium edition one that I'm going to assume is the rarest one, but I don't really like the art, all that much myself. The Rock #1, which is a photo cover right here. And then you have this one, which is the premium edition one. And this admittedly is pretty expensive. It does sell for a decent amount on the secondary market. I mean, asking prices are around, $40, $50, things of that nature. And this is probably, the best first Rock cover you're going to get for yourself. You have Mankind right here, which I felt like this was a kind of a fun comic book cover to point out. This one right here is the cover A, and then his premium edition one is this one right here, which I do notice has very high asking prices for these types of books. And these are the types of ones that I think sell really well if you can actually get them signed. There's the Undertaker one right here, which as far as the Chaos Comics are concerned from 1999, his series was probably, the most prolific. It seems like it has the most demand on the secondary market. I think that probably has to do with the fact that Undertaker as a character probably lends himself better to comic book storytelling. I point out this one right here, Undertaker #4, because as far as I know, this is the first time you're going to see Kane on the cover right there. So there you go, your first Kane cover appearance. We later move forward to WWE Heroes from 2010. This was actually published by Titan, who I think Titan was WWE's company. So this was them creating their own comic books. And this was really their venture into not just doing, wrestling stories, but actually having the wrestlers kind of, go into superhero form. I mean, here you see Triple H fighting a zombie right here. And this series from 2010, is one of the first times that you actually involve a lot of these types of wrestlers like John Cena and Triple H. And I believe Shawn Michaels is in here and all of that sort of generation. Batista and that sort of thing. I mean, it's a very, very obscure comic book. I've read issue #1. It's, it's not the most interesting thing, but hey, it's kind of a fun cover, and at least it's comic book drawn as opposed to a photo real picture on the front. And I'm sure you're going to find a lot of first appearances within this series. Now, the next series that would pop up is WWE Superstars that came out in 2013. This one would kind of adapt, this new era of wrestlers where you start to have CM Punk and that sort of thing. Later on, WWE Superstars would bring back some of the old school wrestlers. So you have some of these variant covers like this one right here, the NWO Hulk Hogan homage to Secret Wars #8. Then you have this one right here, which is one of my personal favorites, WWE Superstars #9, the Joe Jusko cover, which if you guys know this one, this was actually the poster images of one of the pay-per-view events, Joe Jusko actually making a lot of that great imagery. I do actually believe that he created the Royal Rumble poster and the Royal Rumble imagery, which is, some of my all-time favorites. I wish somebody would put that on a comic book cover. I would absolutely buy it. Then after this run in 2014 by Super Genius, the title would eventually go over to Boom Studios. They would create WWE Then Now Forever #1 in 2016, which would also produce, some interesting variant covers that have some value out there on the secondary market. This Undertaker one, this Rock one right here, you have a Triple H one, things of that nature. And then the next year, they would launch WWE #1 from 2017. This would actually be a series in the world of wrestling, actually telling, stories with the Shield and that sort of thing. But I think the coolest thing about this series is that this is where they would actually start to produce, variant covers that actually had what I would call objectively cool art.
that, people actually do like to collect and have some value on the secondary market. Let me share with you guys just a few that I really like. You have this Razor Ramon one. A lot of these variants I'm about to show you are kind of like 1 in 50s, 1 in 25s, 1 in 30s. So they're actually not that easy to find, especially the last one I'm going to show you. But this one right here, you got to love the Razor Ramon looking like GTA. You have this one right here, WWE #1, the Macho Man cover, which, this is probably legitimately my favorite comic book cover. I love the WWF logo. I love the pose of Macho Man. And this one is not a cheap book. I mean, it is definitely tough to find. I mean, it is a 1 in 100. So, at the very minimum, you're going to have to pay probably $75 to get your hands on it. You got some other fun ones right here. Ted DiBiase on the variant cover. And then you have my personal favorite wrestler of all time, Bret the Hitman Hart. I actually wrote a screenplay about the Montreal Screwjob that got optioned by WWF. So there's a little Swaggle lore and history. I've mentioned to you guys before, I am a writer. So that was one of my screenplays that did get optioned. It's in purgatory right now. So if there's any wrestling producers out there that, want to read my script about the Montreal Screwjob, or hey, anyone know Bret Hart, let's have a conversation. Hit me up. And then my personal favorite cover of these variants is this one, WWE 3, the Massafera Forever cover. This one right here, of course, depicting Ric Flair, who Ric Flair has now continued to have his own comic book series, which, has, I think, some excitement behind it. But this book is actually very expensive on the comic book market and very hard to find. You can actually see that, especially if you can get this book signed, there are people paying, upwards of $1,500 for this one. I mean, someone got a steal right here at $500, the most recent sale, but $1,000, $700, $350, $425. This is definitely a book that has some value out there, especially if you can get it sort of signed. There are a lot of people, like I said at the beginning of the video, that are wrestling fans and also comic book collectors. So there is a big cross section there. And it's very interesting to see, if wrestling comic books are going to get hot in the comic book market. I mean, I did check some of the eBay sales, and there were a lot of wrestling comic books that have moved. I don't know if there's one book in particular that would be, the go-to book that this is going to show up, on any sort of top 10 list. But, you can sort of tell with the excitement of WrestleMania 40, it does make you sort of wonder if there are churned WWE fans that found themselves going back to watch wrestling. Are they going to, want to start to pick up some of those collectibles that they have? And chances are, if they were WWE fans, they were probably comic book fans as well. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. That was me kind of doing a breakdown of wrestling within comic books. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about wrestling comic books? Are there other wrestling comic books that you guys find really interesting? Are there other series or other first appearances or other little, nuance things that you guys know about wrestling comic books that you could share with me in the comments? I would really like to know. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Kickstarter link in the description. 8 days left. Make sure that you check it out. And that's the bottom line, because Swaggle said so.